A massive explosion erupted. Errol watched in horror, initially thinking the girls had attacked each other, but they had instead cornered the true culprit. Dia looked down at the man and remarked that it had been a long time, a chill of recognition in her voice. She knew him instantly. It was none other than her self-proclaimed teacher from the tower, and in that moment, the protagonist understood everything. Had been loitering around his castle for quite some time. He had intended to simply ignore the man, but his behavior was proving to be rather peculiar. The girl's supposed teacher shouted that it was indeed him, questioning why they were treating him with such hostility when he was completely blameless. He even presented his identification card as proof. Turning to Dia, he announced that he had come to take her back to the Mage Tower, as her teacher, and wasn't that what she truly wanted? Dia flatly stated she had no memory of him teaching her. She was nothing more than an errand girl. In fact, she had never once considered him her mentor, and his presence here was making her extremely uncomfortable. The man persisted, shouting that the discussion was over and they were leaving immediately. He then questioned if she was even aware of the fact that she had fallen behind by 4 entire years of schooling. At that point, Errol interjected, wondering aloud why Dia would want to go back to that tower of his. He pointed out that if the man wasn't good enough to teach her, his true intentions were highly questionable. The teacher yelled defensively that it wasn't like that at all. Then, he abruptly grabbed her arm with considerable force, insisting, regardless of the circumstances, he was still her teacher. He declared that Dia must be punished for violating the tower's bylaws and warned them not to dare try and stop him. The hero swiftly tore his hand away and, with a curt apology, said that was impossible. The man had to understand that Dia was under contract as his personal magician, and an official request had already been sent to the Mage Tower. The man roared that none of it was true. According to the tower's statutes, she was not permitted to leave so easily. Errol calmly pointed out that, for that matter, his request had not been denied. It appeared the tower's mages were perfectly fine with Dia becoming his personal contracted mage, therefore, he would consider any further interference a direct threat to his safety. The wizard begged him not to be so hasty, pleading that he couldn't allow it, he just couldn't. He then pulled several magical items from his pocket and scattered them on the ground, muttering about how he had no other choice. He would take the girl by any means necessary, and with that, he began to summon magical creatures. He commanded them forward, raving like a madman that the girl must go with him, for without her, he would never have a successful future, as if his entire career needed to be reborn through her power. Errol noted that the scoundrel seemed to be fundamentally misunderstanding something, which was making the entire situation incredibly frustrating. His personal knights had already charged forward to attack, declaring they would not lose, by any means. The hero mused that he'd expected this teacher to be at least a 7th grade magician, but he was only a 5th grade, which was frankly pathetic. This whole affair was devolving into a common schoolyard brawl. Seeing that he was losing, the man shouted that he never intended for things to go this far, but he would have to take a hostage to force them back, and he named the prince himself as his target. His plan, however, was doomed. As if reborn with a surge of new power, Dia unleashed a devastating lightning strike skill, and the creature her former teacher had summoned was annihilated in an instant. The hero watched on, thoroughly impressed. Dia leaped forward, continuing her assault. Next, she cast a skill known as Crushing Whirlwind, which swirled into a massive vortex. The whirlwind tore through the stone creatures and charged directly at the teacher. It was then that Errol casually approached him and asked if he had changed his mind about fighting them. The man, in response, refused to give up and tried one last gambit. In the end, it turned out he had used a teleportation scroll to flee. Asa shouted that he had escaped and they needed to track him down, but the Lord instructed her to just let him go, perhaps knowing from his reincarnation that some enemies weren't worth the effort. Dia then apologized profusely for all the trouble was her doing. Errol reassured everyone that it was fine, insisting the fault was his, and expressed his hope that all charges would now be dropped. He also noted the sheer astonishment on the mage's face when she witnessed the power Dia had summoned to protect him. The sorceress was taken aback by his words. Soon, Errol was inwardly celebrating as the issue was resolved and everyone started to rally behind Dia. However, his work wasn't finished yet. Later that evening, as heavy snow fell, Dia's former teacher was trekking through the dense forest, muttering to himself about how no one would believe she had become so powerful. He vowed to seize her, warning that things would get ugly otherwise. Abruptly, a voice called out from a nearby tree, asking him to elaborate on what ugly entailed. The startled man demanded to know who was there and immediately unleashed his magic, only to find it was our protagonist, who calmly stated that he was already well acquainted with him. Errol then countered with his own magic, invoking the fire arrow skill. A sudden explosion illuminated the entire forest. Afterward, the boy mused to himself, wondering what kind of mage this man was, given his inability to counter such a basic attack. He'd honestly expected more from a magic tower instructor, a standard he held from a life before he was reborn. Still, it was as the problem was now permanently solved. He did all this for his dear Dia, who had suffered so much because of that wretched man. Now, it was time to head home for some well-deserved rest. Sometime later, he was found in the library, diligently writing in a document when a magically propelled book floated in his direction. A smile touched his lips as he recognized Dia's touch, and he commented that she really didn't need to help him with such tasks. The enchantress gently pointed out that it was part of her duties, so it was perfectly fine. Although the initial suspicions had faded, his sister still insisted on restricting household magic, much to the principal's dismay, lamenting how comfortable a life built on magic could be. Out of the blue, Dia asked if she was perhaps disturbing the Lord by always being in his presence. The boy quickly reassured her that it was perfectly fine, emphasizing that the recent incident was not her fault at all. His companion expressed that he was truly merciful, and her respect for him had deepened. Errol inwardly told himself not to get so praised. What would happen when she finally recognized the truth of his reincarnation and saw him for who he truly was? The enchantress then said he had to believe that nothing could faze her anymore, for he was her benefactor, a man she deeply respected. Errol realized he now had a mage who held him in high regard. And yet, this life was proving to be far more varied and interesting than his last. After a while, he found himself outside, enjoying the beautiful weather. It was the perfect day for what he had in mind. It was time to practice his magic. He began by unleashing a chain lightning skill, followed immediately by a swirling snowstorm, and of course, he couldn't forget the classic fire. After running through the spells, he felt he'd performed quite well, not a bad result at all for only his 6th practice session. The boy concluded. He wondered if the mages of this land would be shocked to learn of his rapid progress, a clear benefit of being reborn with prior knowledge. He was situated at the very edge of his domain, making it the perfect training ground. If only there were more monsters around, the practice would be even better. Truly, he couldn't wish for more. That settled it. He would now seek out a worthy opponent. His thoughts then drifted to the queen of this country, his Aunt Elia, a true scoundrel. Errol vividly recalled their first meeting. Even back then, she had looked down on him as if he were nothing more than an insect. He would prefer to ignore her, but she simply wouldn't let up, and now she was attempting to discredit his mother. The boy had endured enough in this life already. There was a limit to his patience to get the show on the road. Shortly after, he arrived at the location of the anti-intruder barrier. As anticipated, bypassing it required a specific mana frequency, but for a professional reborn with his level of expertise, it was child's play. And so, he slipped through the barrier with ease, leaving the knights on guard completely oblivious to his presence. Before long, Errol stood within Elia's palace, marveling at how it dwarfed even his own. Naturally, this wasn't about money. Once inside, he immediately opted for magic, conjuring a massive ball of pure magical energy, deciding it was time to unleash a little chaos. The moment he did, it was as if a meteor shower rained down upon the estate, instantly sparking widespread panic. Our protagonist, however, was absolutely thrilled by the spectacle of such mind-blowing and vibrant fireworks. A subordinate screamed for Duke Diesel Prats to take cover immediately. Flames began to rain from the heavens, leaving the old Duke utterly baffled by the sudden assault. Soon, onlookers noticed that lightning was also striking the grounds, and while its origin was a mystery to them, the cause was devilishly simple. It was Errol, laughing manically and declaring how much this fiery party delighted him. He taunted them to get moving, or they'd end up roasted right where they stood. As he continued to engulf the estate in flames, he spotted a group of people in a state of panic. He correctly deduced they were vassals of the family residing on the grounds. Next, he decided to bestow a little gift upon the Duke. A curse. It wasn't permanent, something akin to a nasty flu. It would vanish once Errol left, but for now, he wanted the Duke to suffer. Having gone through the trouble of breaking in, the boy had no intention of leaving empty-handed. Upon reaching a locked door, he obliterated the lock without a second thought, intensely curious about what treasures they kept hidden away. It turned out to be a treasure trove overflowing with gold coins and precious jewels. Errol, of course, was delighted by the find. Eventually, he mused about teleporting the entire haul for himself, and as a final touch, decided to leave behind a calling card. Shortly after, Duke was informed that a note had been left for him at the scene of the crime. The nobleman was cursing furiously, demanding to know the identity of this vile scoundrel. Yet, when he and his butler read its contents, they were left utterly speechless. Comprehending the message, it contained a strange poem about feeling cold and melting the stove in one's heart, along with a signature that read, "A professional who has experienced reincarnation." Naturally, the first person to be alerted was Queen Elia, who simply couldn't believe the news, collapsing to the floor in sheer terror. She asked frantically if her father was unharmed, to which the maid replied that thankfully, there were no fatalities. Most of the victims suffered only minor burns. Elia couldn't fathom how anyone could commit such a heinous act. Of course, the emperor was swiftly brought up to speed. He declared that attacking a great noble family was an act of high treason, making it imperative to capture the culprit at all costs. His Majesty's advisors began to deliberate. Judging from the sheer scale of the fire and the lingering mana traces, it was clearly the work of at least a 6th-class mage, or perhaps an entire group of them attacking in unison, but they were certainly no weaker than the 5th class. Similar to the incident with Princess Can, it could very well be the work of witch doctors. Just then, a servant rushed in with an urgent report, exclaiming that there appeared to be an epidemic. Following the fire, every single member of the Diesel household has fallen gravely ill, with reports that their bodies are simply weakened by the sudden assault. For the Empress, the most devastating blow was the complete annihilation of her family's fortune. She ordered her maid to spare no expense in discovering their attackers. The messenger confirmed that a kingdom-wide search was underway for the culprit, with whispers suggesting that the woman herself might be the next target. Despite the crushing weight of it all, she understood the gravity of her situation. Scanning the latest reports, Asia noted that the Praz family's standing had plummeted, to the point where even their closest allies refused to aid in rebuilding the estate. Kania added that it wasn't just the mansion that was lost to the flames, all their priceless treasures had vanished as well. Asia confirmed that being great nobles, they wouldn't simply crumble and lose all hope. Still, caution was paramount, which is precisely what she discussed with Prince Errol. He had merely smiled, saying, "Indeed, the attack was dreadful. In a world where fortunes can be lost and reborn in an instant, I believe a visit to the afflicted duchy to offer my condolences is in order." Some time later, Prince Errol and his men gathered before the greenhouse. He announced that everyone had done a magnificent job and their food worries were now a thing of the past. The man beside him, with tears in his eyes, confessed that he never dreamed they could cultivate such a bountiful harvest in this barren land. The grains they reaped were twice their normal size, and he declared it was all due to Prince Errol's guidance. The young prince, however, corrected him, saying the credit truly belonged to their magician. They had toiled tirelessly, allowing this land to be reborn and yield such a spectacular result. He quickly recognized that this outcome was nothing short of brilliant, and he was immensely pleased with their efforts. The queen's faction would no longer trouble him, as they had lost all interest in his affairs, and his small empire was finally getting back on its feet. This was the start of its reincarnation. 50 years following the Great War, 3 nations managed to stay afloat, becoming the so-called 3 great powers: the Eresia Empire, the Merman Empire, and the Kingdom of Demanuel. Among this trio, the Kingdom of Demanuel wielded the least influence, surviving more through sheer fortune than actual might. It was in this very kingdom that a notable event unfolded at the Chancellor's banquet. The Chancellor was just raising a toast, hoping all his guests would enjoy the evening, when a man approached their group. He noted that while his gift was humble, it had been prepared with the utmost sincerity. The old Chancellor inquired as to what it could be. The guest then gestured for a servant to present the item without further delay. Inside the box that was offered to him lay a precious vial. The Chancellor immediately recognized it as a rare elixir, sold exclusively in the Kingdom of Arnesia. It was said that if applied to the scalp, it would cause a complete reincarnation of one's hair, a legendary cure for baldness. The guest continued, expressing his hope that the Chancellor would like it and accept this token of their esteem. The old man noted that such a gift must have been incredibly expensive and asked what the young man desired in return. The man replied that he hadn't considered receiving anything, but if the Chancellor insisted, his son was being deployed to the war front next year, and he was rather concerned. The Chancellor simply smiled, assuring him not to worry, for he had already committed the man's unspoken request to memory. Recently, imported goods from the Kingdom of Arnesia had become wildly popular within the Kingdom of Demanuel. Naturally, we are referring to the black market trade. In that very same year, the royal conference hall of the kingdom was thrown into chaos. King Hezin Luciarenia was appalled, demanding to know the meaning of it all. People were still smuggling goods from Arnesia, and he had heard that the banquet was a lavish affair, serving only the most exclusive imported goods, yet he couldn't grasp the true nature of what was about to unfold. The king's deputy, Duke Elegant, pleaded for his majesty to find his composure, but the king raged on. Don't they realize the consequences if things are allowed to continue like this? If left unchecked, the foreign debt would surely double, or perhaps even triple, and the economic gap between the 3 countries isn't yet a chasm, but the scales of power are already tipping decisively in one direction, all because someone over there relentlessly invents new products. The Merman Empire was already protesting the import of their paper, citing its extraordinarily unusual production technology. The king was utterly at a loss, with no idea how to bridge this widening economic divide. At that moment, the deputy insisted that they could not delay a second longer. Action had to be taken. His Highness countered that their opponent is a formidable nation, not one that could be defeated easily, but Elegant argued that it wasn't necessary to confront them alone. He proposed that in such trying times, they should rally with like-minded nations and forge an alliance powerful enough to bring down the Kingdom of Arnesia. And so, the Kingdom of Demanuel began dispatching numerous alliance proposals. Soon after, a secret meeting was convened in the shadowy dungeons of the kingdom's palace, where Duke Elegant welcomed all to share their perspectives. Grand Duke Gong, the esteemed representative of the Merman Empire, noted that it had been quite some time since they had last gathered. Count Marin Bernard, representing the Principality of San, had also arrived. He expressed his hope that this meeting would result in more than just empty words. Elegant knew perfectly well that the Principality of Sidon was not among the 3 great powers, but they commanded a respectable army. With their presence, all the intended allies were now gathered. Gong noticed that. Sok was absent. He feigns purity, someone remarked, but he comes running at the first scent of profit. Elegant declared that they were going to dismantle the Arnesian Empire, so there was no point in hiding anything from each other, and he suggested they begin their talks as true partners. As you all are painfully aware, he began, we must put a stop to the Arnesian Empire. You cannot simply ignore their explosively growing economy. Gong affirmed that this was indeed a grave headache for his people, and Marin voiced his doubts, wondering if there was any real chance of defeating them. If we fail, it will become an insurmountable problem. The interlocutor approached him sharply, retorting that this was precisely why they needed to form an alliance. No matter how powerful a nation is, it will be incredibly difficult for it to resist an entire alliance at once. Moreover, if we force them into a war, they simply won't have the resources to continue production. Incidentally, it is rumored that the youngest prince is the one driving the creation of these novelties. At the tender age of 8, he created something truly remarkable, and by 14, he had revitalized a dying land. It's as if he was reborn with knowledge from another world. Immediately, one of the lords dismissed the claims, suggesting the rumors were exaggerated, but another shouted back that it was all true. If we leave things as they are, he will grow up to cause us even more trouble, and the dominance of Arnesia will never come to an end. Therefore, we must not hesitate. We can either stall and live in fear of war, or we can march now and remove that upstart prince from the board. Such an aggressive attitude was exactly what the allies wanted to hear. Consequently, Gong announced his full agreement. In fact, he added, "Our emperor has long strike them." Marin also confirmed that his people were eager for a confrontation. Hearing this, Elegant was delighted that they had finally reached an agreement. Now, we shall elaborate on our plans. Meanwhile, word of this conspiracy was already being reported to the Arnesians. The emperor, of course, had already guessed what was unfolding. Those three nations had undeniably forged a secret pact. It was perfectly clear that their intentions were malicious, and he warned that a great storm was gathering on the horizon. This coming conflict would make the war from 30 years ago seem like a mere squabble between children. However, this year's tax revenue and the size of the army were many times greater than the last, so they were confident they would not be defeated. Next, the emperor commanded his subordinates to dispatch official notices to all the vassals. When Errol received the news, he was somewhat surprised. He wondered for a moment if he'd gone too far, but he knew he had done everything correctly. Dia, noticing his unease, asked what was wrong and if the walk was not to his liking. By this point, he had reached the age of 15. Our hero explained that he felt a sense of impending doom and that it was crucial for them to meet with his sister and prepare accordingly. It turns out the neighboring kingdom was incensed by Errol's massive mining operations and had even decided to form an alliance despite their historical differences, which meant they had to prepare for war. The main character could practically feel the waves of malicious energy being directed at him. Kane quickly realized that these nations had formed a three-state alliance, which was strange. Weren't they allied with the Merman Empire, he questioned. The prince confirmed that was true, but it was in the past. The girl then noted, if they were behaving so suspiciously, perhaps a preemptive strike was the best course of action. Errol acknowledged that it sounded good, but if they attacked first, they would be labeled the aggressors, as they had no definitive proof of hostile intent. They weren't foolish enough to leave any incriminating traces. He remarked that their kingdom was fortunate she had managed to uncover their secret. In truth, Errol had expected this himself, but based on his memories before his reincarnation, he thought it would happen in about 5 years. It was almost comical how quickly events had accelerated. He mused that no matter the world or its rulers, it's always the same. People die without a second thought, which is why the military remains in demand. Is it really so difficult to avoid fighting? The thought frustrated him immensely. Suddenly, his sister asked if he was all right. He assured her that everything was fine and he was just pondering the situation. Since nothing was confirmed yet, he asked what she intended to do, but she didn't understand the reason behind his question. Her brother explained that he thought she might want to return to the royal palace for safety. It turned out their father was extremely worried about her and had even sent a letter. He wasn't as concerned about his son, but he did not wish to send his beloved daughter onto a bloody battlefield. Errol clarified that he wasn't telling her to flee, but simply suggesting that it would be wiser for her to remain in the palace until the threat subsided. In an emergency, her status as a princess must take precedence over her duties as a knight. Naturally, the girl was outraged by the suggestion and immediately voiced her opposition. Our hero was taken aback, not expecting her to refuse so decisively. At the same time, he stressed that this was not a joke. If the situation worsened, they would be fighting for their very lives, which led him to ask if she was absolutely certain of her choice. His sister just smiled and replied that it was fine. Hadn't she sworn an oath to protect him? She wasn't going to stand by and do nothing simply because she was a princess. Even as royalty, she questioned why she should be the one to hide from danger. Errol was truly surprised by her unwavering resolve. He couldn't recall when his sister had become so strong, so different from the girl he knew before he was reborn. He remarked that he couldn't believe their little princess had finally grown up. The girl, however, didn't understand why he was making such a big deal about it. Her brother sent a message to their father, informing him of her decision to stay, admitting in the letter that he couldn't convince his sister that her choice was a mistake, despite having exhausted all his arguments. A short while later, SAA was enjoying a drink in the castle's parlor, remarking that war was a truly serious matter. Asha then asked if she had any personal experience with actual warfare. SAA confirmed that she most certainly did, having been on the front lines before. She had been in 2 wars, navigating the dangerous front lines, but she clarified that those were merely localized conflicts, unlike the impending one. Next, she asked Asha how long it had been since she returned to her homeland, having heard rumors that her younger brother had entered the academy this year, suggesting she should see him while she still had the opportunity. Asha replied that she wasn't certain it was the right time for a visit, though she was confident he would understand her reasons. Her colleague, for her part, wasn't planning. SAA just smiled, saying she had nowhere to go anyway, and suggested it was better to just have a drink. Who could say, perhaps they wouldn't get another chance like this. Meanwhile, Aurella was in his office, continuing to formulate his master plan. Even though he told his sister nothing was set in stone, that he estimated war would be declared upon them within the year. In any case, he had to prepare now to avoid a devastating defeat. These enemies were formidable, and it was unclear what their chance of winning was, probably somewhere around a grim 30%. As someone who was reborn with the mind of a military professional, he guessed their forces numbered somewhere around 600 or 700,000 soldiers. Assuming a defensive position, they could also muster 600,000 warriors. It was difficult to imagine a decisive victory. In the worst-case scenario, he would have to resort to some dirty tricks, but he would be fine as long as he could defend his fortress. Right now, his top priorities were to live his life to the fullest, which meant a lord like him simply had to devise a plan to survive this war. In that case, he had to start by reinforcing his troops. He would ensure the enemy didn't even reach his lands. All he had to do was make certain that not a single rat slipped past his defenses. And so, he arrived at Aken's forge and casually asked if he was very. In response to his question, a hammer whizzed past his head. The young lord quickly realized the dwarf was in a terrible mood today. Aken offered him a belated welcome to Philia, sarcastically wondering if he was finding everything to his liking. The old dwarf admitted he was satisfied with the cutting-edge equipment and obscenely luxurious amenities provided. The problem, he grumbled, was that the local blacksmiths were complete garbage. The prince asked why they weren't following his orders. In response, the dwarf bellowed that he hadn't slept in about 2 days because of. Errol calmly noted that it was probably because ordinary people couldn't endure such a demanding workload. Aken calmed down a fraction and admitted that he had at least learned some valuable information about Bullet, not realizing its recipe was so simple. The lord remarked that this wasn't particularly good news, and the main thing was not to miscalculate the grams. Getting back to the matter at hand, he was here to place an order. He needed a large quantity of weapons and asked if production could begin immediately. The dwarf reported that if the design was simple, there would be no problems, but he was also curious about the number of pieces required. The young lord leaned in close, whispering the full details into his ear. The old man was left completely and utterly flabbergasted by the sheer scale of the order. As he stood there, seething and trying to process the information, Aurella knew it was time to make a hasty exit as another hammer flew right past him. And the talk of him being some crazed kid capable of arming 20,000 soldiers was pure terror. He likely had no concept of the immense time it would require. Ben was only trying to be reassuring, but the master continued to shout that the boy couldn't even fathom the scale of it. Errol realized that at this rate, he would break his neck one day, a fate he wouldn't risk again in this reborn life, so he had to be extremely careful. Still, trusting Aken to see it through, he decided to proceed to the next step and arrive to purchase more slaves. He was greeted by the manager as a VIP customer, to which the prince remarked that he hadn't expected to be back here so soon. The manager noted his own surprise upon receiving the letter, wondering just how many slaves he needed this time. Errol stated that this request would be the largest one yet. The manager assured him he had nothing to worry about, thinking he already knew who he was dealing with, but our hero managed to stun him once again by mentioning that he required 50,000 people. That was 10 times more than the last order. He wondered if it was even possible, and although he had claimed he wouldn't be surprised, the man was at a loss for words, hesitating slightly as he processed that figure. Errol noticed this and asked if they didn't have that many available. The man explained that the issue was the number of labor requests from the nobility, which had recently surged. They all hoped to conscript the slaves as soldiers, and about 2,000 to 3,000 had already been sold for that very purpose. He apologized for the intrusive question, then asked if the prince also intended to use all 50,000 people as soldiers. The boy confirmed that was part of the plan, but not for all of them. He and his family were buying them to grant them their freedom, just like the last time, and this was merely an approximate number he was estimating. The manager mulled it over for a moment and said that he understood the gentleman's intentions. Errol thought to himself that, for this man, all that mattered, after all, was money. As long as he was raising soldiers, protection was guaranteed, and this merchant was surely just looking for a way to maximize his profits. Therefore, Errol stated plainly that the manager knew he disliked idle chatter. Toth acknowledged this was true, as it formed the basis of serious business, and asked if he should have the slaves sent to his estate at once. The prince confirmed this and then inquired how long it would take to gather the correct number. The manager stated that it would take about 5 days. The boy calculated this and replied that he would come in person to collect them in 5 days. The manager pointed out that it would be quite a major hassle and offered to bring them himself, but the prince again insisted that it was no trouble at all and that he would come himself. As he departed, he felt a sense of satisfaction. He now had much more work to do, and things were getting complicated. This gave him 5 days to get everything prepared, which meant it was time to take matters directly into his own hands. Soon after, Errol informed his sister that he was going to be busy for another 5 days. Concerned, she asked if he would be okay. He paused to think. The main thing was to ensure she didn't suspect the truth behind his reincarnation. He needed to keep her occupied with something to distract her. In the end, the girl agreed, but warned him that they would return to this conversation. Her brother then asked, how about a walk around the capital? He was well aware that his sister was a princess, but due to the rumors of war, she had been confined to the palace for most of her life. As such, she was incredibly curious about the world outside. He was certain she was left with a powerful desire to see it. Kia then asked what else. He once again suggested they go on a small excursion, perhaps a short walk. She had to sadly admit that she had nothing better to do anyway, and that he was right. As a result, the girl agreed to go, just this once, after successfully persuading Kane to come along. Soon, she found herself amidst the bustling city streets, remarking that it was a little different from what she had imagined. The boy then pointed out that it was just the countryside and urged her to hold on tight as they explored, even daring to sample some of the peculiar local cuisine. Their travels took them past all the local landmarks, and at one point, the girl excitedly told her brother to look, pointing out what appeared to be his own creation. They were on display for sale, and she recognized them instantly, noting they were signed by the silver-haired sage. As usual, our hero was utterly mortified by that nickname. He felt a deep sense of embarrassment, wondering who on earth had come up with it and why they were attributing these creations to him. He quickly turned his sister away, urging her to look at something else, only to discover that the very next stalls were selling an array of swords. A friendly merchant hailed them, asking if they were in the market for a new blade and assuring them they had come to the right place. This was the merchandise of the famous saint, he proclaimed, claiming every single sword was forged by them and that visitors needed to appreciate the dwarves' talent. He even offered a 10% discount, for today only. After a quick inspection, the prince informed the merchant that none of it was true, despite the tempting offer. He warned that selling counterfeit dwarven goods was a dangerous game. The merchant grew wary, defensively asking what he was talking about. Errol then turned to his sister, asking her to channel her mana into one of the swords, but cautioning her not to overdo it. The girl took the blade in her hands and did as he instructed. Moments later, the much-hyped weapon shattered into pieces. The prince smiled, explaining that fake swords always break when you channel aura into them. Attempting to squirm his way out, the salesman insisted there must be some mistake, but the prince pressed on. He stated that since the merchant was so insistent, they could go verify it themselves, pointing out that the dwarves were nearby, and if he was proven wrong, he would be more than ready to compensate for the damages. The merchant finally realized he had picked a fight with the wrong person, and his demeanor changed instantly. He quickly apologized and begged to let the matter drop. Errol then pointed to a single dagger, stating that if he were given it, he would forget the whole incident. The seller immediately began to stammer and mumble. Our hero then asked if there was a problem, fixing him with a stern, angry glare. In response, he was assured there was no problem at all, and the man profusely thanked him for his mercy. And that is how Aurella came to possess the dagger. Kana, curious, asked if he truly liked it that much, but her brother simply pointed. This one was an authentic dwarven dagger. Even just by holding it, he could feel it was an original. He then held it out to his sister, asking her to take it, explaining it was a gift for her. The girl was taken aback but accepted it with a heartfelt thank you, remarking that Errol was the only person who ever cared for her so deeply. The prince realized she was as happy as if she'd just received the most gorgeous dress in the entire world. He felt truly grateful for this reborn life, realizing his sister was a unique soul and that they were meant to be family. And so, a few days passed after that moment. Kana was now asking if something was too much, but Errol didn't quite understand what was wrong. He told her to imagine herself as the commander of an army of 20,000 soldiers, leading them into glorious battle. After considering it, his sister declared that it sounded absolutely wonderful. Meanwhile, Asha and the other girls were on their way to meet Prince Errol. They hadn't seen him for several days, but the sight that greeted them at the entrance gate left them completely stunned. It was Mr. Link who reported that Prince Errol had returned, but what truly astonished the knights was that he had brought with him 50,000 new subjects. Asha relayed the news. Realizing that everything unfolded just as he predicted, she felt he shouldn't have been left to handle it all by himself. Asia, couldn't believe her eyes at the sheer number of volunteers. Dia immediately began to worry about how they would feed everyone, and it was almost comical that this was her primary concern. Asia voiced that while she understood the need to prepare for war, perhaps they should have considered hiring seasoned mercenaries instead. The Lord countered that this was the wrong approach, as war is a long and arduous affair. He explained that enemies would always covet Philia, so they simply needed to place their faith in him. After all, since he was reborn with this new purpose, has he ever led them astray? Asia conceded, saying she understood completely and had no further objections, prompting the young lord to thank her for her trust. He then added that he would require their assistance in training these new recruits, as he intended to forge them into elite warriors. The plan was to identify those with potential and then form a dedicated squad for intensive training, additional training manual himself, which the knights would then use to lead the drills. Asia then asked if the women could also participate, to which he gave an enthusiastic affirmative. With that settled, he reflected on how well things were progressing. It was clear he would be incredibly busy for the foreseeable future, especially since the leaders of the Tri-County Alliance had decided to test his mettle. If they dared to invade his territory, they would face dire consequences. He vowed to personally line them up and make them regret their arrogance. Shortly after, Aurella and Dia were trekking somewhere together, and the young lord couldn't help but complain about the strenuous climb, wondering why all mages seemed to live in the mountains. Dia explained that most of them were simply old-fashioned traditionalists, adding that younger mages, like herself, generally preferred to reside in bustling cities. The prince nodded, saying that made perfect sense. The sorceress then added that she actually preferred the mountains because she found city life dull and the food options lacking. The prince agreed with her sentiment but wondered if that was truly her only reason. Eventually, Errol arrived at the home of his magic mentor, who noted that they hadn't seen each other in quite some time and inquired about the purpose of his visit. Our hero claimed it was nothing special, merely that he wished to purchase something, though his mentor could immediately tell it was no simple request. The wizard, aware of the rumors, asked if his visit was related to the war and what he needed. Errol then made his request, a special stone capable of channeling mana. Specifically, He needed at least one Class A artifact. The wizard pointed out that such powerful stones were officially registered with the Magic Tower, then questioned why Errol had come to him. Errol stated that he had already considered that path, knowing full well the Magic Tower would refuse to sell to him. His mentor understood the implication and asked if the artifacts were intended for the war effort. The young lord knew that mages were just as wary as common folk when it came to conflict, but involving powerful magical artifacts was another matter entirely. He pleaded for understanding, insisting that he only wanted to protect his own territory. The wizard acknowledged his reasoning but still pressed the point, asking why he was the one being asked for such a significant favor. The prince's patience wore thin. Surely he knows, he thought, he's not so dense that he can't put two and two together. And just as the wizard also realized, the young lord never forgets a debt. Errol knew the man was a snob, but deep down, he was also a pragmatist. At least he wasn't a fool and was quick to connect the dots. The wizard finally sighed in understanding, stating that it would take some time to procure. On the way back, the prince felt a wave of relief, pleased that another critical problem was solved. He felt he'd been pushing himself far too hard lately and desperately needed a break. Suddenly, he saw Dia collapse to her knees, and he asked in alarm what was wrong, only for the girl to ask in a horrified whisper if the cost wasn't astronomically high. The prince, understanding her shock, simply reassured her that it was a necessary expense. That's hardly a problem for him. His earnings are quite substantial. If she's truly that curious, he could disclose the total value of his assets based on the herd's information. His companion nearly went pale and fell into a stupor at the mere suggestion. The prince mused that he hadn't even included the value of the queen's stolen treasure in that calculation. In any case, there was no cause for alarm, so he tried to rouse the sorceress that it was time they returned to the castle. A short while later, he commanded the wizards to begin their work, informing them that they now had a crucial mission. Intrigued, they inquired about the nature of the project. The young prince explained that it was imperative to prepare everything before the war began. He stressed that this was also confidential information and asked if he could count on their discretion to keep it private. He figured it was about time they were brought into the loop. Of course, they would be compensated handsomely over time, but he urged them not to be discouraged. He assured them it was all for their own benefit and, with that, announced he was going for a walk around the capital that very day. Asya, who had arrived with him, asked what had brought him to this part of the city. He feigned confusion at her question, wondering if he wasn't allowed a simple stroll while preparing for a war. He was always off attending to various deals, and this time, he had simply dragged the girl along with him. She found herself utterly surprised when she realized where they had arrived. This was the Imperial Academy. If the prince's information was correct, her younger brother was a student here. That meant she simply had to see him at least once. The Imperial Academy, an institution accredited by the court and institution, imperial family, was dedicated to educating the children of the nobility, although the highest-ranking aristocrats still tended to hire private tutors. Nevertheless, this was where the majority of noble children received their schooling. Asha couldn't fathom why he had brought her to this place. Errol pointed out that whenever he offered her time off, she always claimed to have too much work. He then asked, "So, do you truly have no desire to see your own brother at all?" The girl insisted that he shouldn't have brought her here in the first place. He then gently chided her, asking her not to be so stubborn. It wasn't as if he was some insensitive employer. He had even prepared their passes. The prince, whose own family bonds were complicated by his reincarnation, felt it was the least he could do. The prince knew that only children of noble birth study here, and it struck him as odd that he still knew practically nothing about Ash's brother. That's why he asked if she knew where to find him, but she admitted to not knowing his exact location, adding that if she spotted him in a crowd, she would point him out immediately. Apparently, the boy bore a strong resemblance to her. The prince wondered if that was truly all the information she had. Suddenly, his eyes landed on a young man fitting the description, and he asked, "What about him? Doesn't he look like you?" Asha immediately called out his name, Ares, which made it perfectly clear to the prince who he was. That being said, it was still unclear who the girls surrounding him were. One of the girls was asking if the boy had considered her offer. Ares replied that he had, but confessed that, honestly, it was a difficult. The prince realized how horrible it was, a familiar ugliness he knew well before he was reborn. Even in a place like this, there were bullies, so he asked the girl if her brother needed his intervention. She suggested they wait a moment, and after those girls were left speechless by his rejection, the kid could finally exhale with a sigh of relief. Just then, his sister approached him and demanded to know what had been going on. Ares was completely taken aback, asking his sister how on earth she had managed to get here. She brushed his question aside, telling him that wasn't the issue at the moment, and demanded to know what those girls had wanted from him. He had written in his letters that he was doing perfectly fine, but what she had just seen certainly suggested otherwise. Her brother insisted that she had it all wrong, claiming that Lady Carrot wasn't that kind of person. Asha simply asked him to answer her honestly about what they wanted, but the boy just shouted that he refused to answer her. His sister could hardly believe her ears, failing to grasp his meaning. The prince, noting he'd never seen Asha so bewildered, asked her to stand by and let him handle the conversation. He approached the boy, introducing himself as his sister's employer. Ares immediately asked if he was the third prince, but the prince requested they drop the formalities for the moment. He got straight to the point, asking if someone was bullying. He wanted to know the name of the girl who was giving him trouble. The young boy quickly insisted that wasn't the case at all, and that their chat was going just fine. The prince promised to keep this between them, away from his sister's ears, which finally prompted Ares to start talking. He revealed the girl's name was Hea Ket, the youngest daughter of Marquis Ket. The prince felt the name was familiar, trying to place where he'd heard it before. It suddenly clicked. He remembered the Marquis from his birthday celebration. The Marquis hadn't seemed like a disreputable nobleman, so he questioned if his daughter was truly harassing Ash's little brother and his bodyguard. The boy exclaimed once more that it was nothing like that. He then hesitated, struggling to find the words as he recalled the moment it all began. The girl had cornered him against a wall, leaving him completely stunned, and then she boldly asked him to go out with her. Ares reluctantly confessed that she wanted him to be her boyfriend. This was a development Errol had certainly not anticipated, leaving him utterly astonished. The boy explained he had simply fled, telling her he couldn't because they were only 11 years old. Finally, the prince understood the full picture. The boy continued, saying that even though he had rejected her, she persisted with her advances, while the other girls in his class started treating him like a prized pet. So, it wasn't exactly bullying, but more of an overwhelming, unwanted affection. The prince was genuinely astounded. This kid had absolutely no idea how popular he was. Who would have thought the relationships of children could be so dramatic, as if they were all reborn with adult problems? The thought alone was exhausting. Ares then continued, explaining that he simply doesn't know how to handle her. The prince then mused aloud, well, why not just ask her yourself? At that, the boy looked horrified, turning to Lady Ket and asking how long she had been standing there. The girl replied that she returned with something more to say, then curiously, but I wonder who all of these people are. Ares insisted they weren't suspicious characters and, pointing to Asha, he declared that she was looking at his future sister-in-law. The girl was completely baffled by the statement and couldn't make any sense of it, and as the prince began to clarify, Hea interrupted, saying she already understood. It was clearly Ares' older sister. She'd heard a great deal about her. The young lady immediately gave a proper bow, stating it was an honor to finally meet her. I am Hea Ket, the youngest daughter of the Ket family, and I wish to date your younger brother. While Asha was still reeling from the declaration, she couldn't quite process what was happening. The prince just smiled, remarking that her directness was both impressive and quite brave. The knight then asked what she should do in a situation like this. He replied, this is a matter strictly between them, before suggesting, don't we leave it up to the two of them? Asha argued that Ares claimed he was being forced, but the prince noted he never actually said he disliked it. It seems he's merely confused and unsure of how to react, the prince explained. He then added, for the girl's benefit, that the Ket family possesses an exceptional talent for generating profit through shrewd investments. If Ares were to get along with this young lady, it would be quite advantageous for their family. Asha found this reasoning incredibly odd, as if this whole reincarnation was a dream. That's a secondary concern. If they genuinely like each other, why can't she just step back and let things unfold naturally? His companion understood the point, but if he wasn't disgusted by her, then why did he refuse her offer to date? The prince mused that perhaps it was a matter of male pride, or perhaps some other, more complicated reason was at play. Just then, another young man arrived and demanded to know if Ares was bothering. Lucen couldn't comprehend why a nobody like him was even speaking to Lady Carrot. Ares defended the boy, asking Lucen why he was blaming Ares when she was the one who offered to date him. But her suitor shouted back that he was completely against it and couldn't understand why she refused to socialize with him, only to choose this utter scoundrel instead. It was a classic love triangle unfolding within the academy walls, and Aurella, in all his reborn wisdom, could only wonder what this mess was. Lucen continued his tirade, sneering that Ares' family was in decline, to the point that his eldest sister had to go work in a village. He argued that if Ares associated with such a person, she would only bring dishonor upon the prestigious Carrot family. Hearing these words, the prince knew that Lucen had crossed a line. Suddenly, Ares yelled out, demanding that the other man stop insulting his sister and Lady Carrot. Lucen was aghast, asking if he thought this was a joke. Before realizing that the situation was escalating dangerously, Errol decided to intervene, suggesting a change of subject and warning the boy, if you constantly stick your nose where it doesn't belong, sooner or later, it's going to get broken. The prince had no intention of listening to this boy's childish tantrum any longer. Lucen shot back, asking why he was meddling in others' affairs when he hadn't been asked. Errol stated that he, at least, had authorization to be here, and as a guest, Lucen should show some basic courtesy. At that moment, another man was drawn to the commotion, asking what all the noise was about. Our hero couldn't help but wonder why so many people had gathered in this one spot. Suddenly, a younger student addressed the newcomer as teacher. Errol observed that the man's attire looked more like that of a professor than a student. The unfamiliar man was just about to ask who Aurella was, when Aurella, anticipating the question, introduced himself as the third prince of the Aresia kingdom and the lord of a village called Philia. The surrounding students gasped at the revelation of his identity, and Lucen's brother immediately understood the gravity of the situation. He asked if the prince would be willing to move to a more private place to continue their discussion. Soon, our protagonist, along with followed him. Their new acquaintance introduced himself as Kato Lucen, the eldest son of the Lucen family and, as it turned out, a part-time swordsmanship instructor at this very academy. He immediately began to apologize for his younger brother's deplorable behavior. He assured them their family would issue a formal apology later. The prince, however, informed him that the apology should be directed to Ares, not to him. Cadell countered that the issue wasn't so one-sided, claiming it was Lady Ayres who had initiated the whole affair in the first place. He then suggested that, since that was the case, perhaps it should be the Carrot family who ought to apologize. Asha immediately interjected, demanding to know what he was implying, for she was certain Ayres had done nothing wrong. Errol had been wondering about the origins of this childish drama, a scene he'd witnessed countless times before his reincarnation. But now, the true reason was becoming crystal clear. The Royal Academy, while presenting itself as an educational institution, was in reality a grand stage where young nobles forged political connections rather than merely studying. It seemed this boy, Lucen, was also just following his family's orders. What at first appeared to be simple jealousy was far more calculated. With time, even a straightforward goal can become twisted by ambition, a rather unpleasant one. Cadell proceeded to state that the Ket and Ludson families have shared a close bond for a very long time. Therefore, the Pernal family should not stand in the way. Our hero was taken aback that an academy instructor would behave in such a manner. It became clear they viewed the Perel family as nothing more than an obstacle in their path. The prince retorted that the man was speaking complete nonsense, questioning what a family name could possibly have to do with the relationships of their children. Do teachers still preach discrimination in this day and age? He asked. Cadell noted that the difference in rank is something that can never be ignored, and that forging the appropriate connections was a nobleman's primary duty. Errol remarked, if that is true, are you aware that Asher is my personal— So are you implying that a knight of the royal family is beneath you in station? In response, Cadell rose to his feet and indicated that he understood the point. He promised to warn his younger brother and expressed his hope that the Perel family would refrain from any future actions that could lead to misunderstandings. Errol, realizing Cadell was still trying to control the narrative, simply told him to leave at once. The situation was this. Haya was interested in the heir, but this man's brother was obstructing her, and therefore, it was necessary to resolve the matter in the traditional fashion. Our hero proposed the most straightforward method, one that has been used by noblemen to settle such romantic disputes since time immemorial, a way for honor to be reborn from conflict. Asaya, surprised, asked what on earth he was— Cadell was equally stunned, wondering aloud if the prince was suggesting a duel between their houses. Errol confirmed that Cadell was absolutely correct, stating they should indeed hold a duel to settle the matter, pitting the eldest daughter of the Pernal family against the eldest son of the Lucene family. And by the way, he added, the younger ones will be involved as well. His counterpart immediately dismissed the idea as nonsense, but the prince declared that he had not finished. If his side won, the Lucene family would not only back off but also actively assist with the dire food shortage situation caused by the recent crop failures. This proposal immediately piqued Kettle's interest. Errol then remarked that on the Perel family's side, both Asa and Asher must also emerge victorious. Only then would their triumph be considered absolute. Otherwise, if even a single representative from their side won, it would count as a victory for the Lucenes. Cadell mulled it over. The proposal seemed, but a victory would bring a twofold benefit to his family, and the outcome already seemed perfectly clear. After all, his younger brother was 2 years older than Asa and possessed a much stronger physique, and since Cadell himself was a former officer of the 13th Order, he was confident he could easily defeat a mere escort knight, even one who fought as if he'd had a complete reincarnation of skill. Therefore, after weighing the odds, he remarked with newfound respect, since your highness is making the offer personally, I have no right to refuse, and offered a confident smile. Errol swore upon the honor of the Arnesia clan that he would uphold his end of the bargain and expected Cadell to do the same. Asa, on the other hand, was completely against this idea. She yelled at the prince that while she usually tolerated his antics, this time he had gone too far. The hero seemed confused by her reaction. Normally, she would say something similar and just ask him not to do it again. The girl insisted that this was different. The prince then explained that he knew he was being a bit reckless, but he asked if she was truly going to contradict everything she herself stood for. This man had openly mocked their family and disrespected the heirs. Your brother is being treated with utter contempt, he pressed. Is that something you can accept? The girl noted that her primary duty was as his bodyguard. She argued that she could not allow her personal feelings to dictate her actions. The prince confirmed that she was his personal knight bodyguard. To ignore his guard is to ignore him, and he refuses to remain silent when he or his men are insulted, so this should be considered the beginning of their end. She had to admit, she also wanted to put that little brat in his place, so she offered to show her brother just how formidable a knight his sister could be. However, Asha still disliked the idea, though she reacted with more composure and, in the end, even consented. As for her brother, when he learned what they had discussed, he was in tears, convinced he was completely powerless. It was unfathomable to him how he could possibly defeat Lucen. The prince questioned what was so complex about a children's fight, advising him to just land the first blow, and everything would fall into place. But the boy continued to mumble in doubt, so the hero walked over to offer his support, placing a hand on his shoulder and asking him to answer one question with total honesty. From his perspective, it was clear this Lucen Jr. was relentlessly bullying him. So, in all fairness, didn't that enrage him? The boy conceded that he couldn't say he wasn't infuriated by it all. He does feel anger, but then he is reminded of his sister, who worked so tirelessly for their family's reputation, and he knew he couldn't afford to act in any reckless way. He couldn't conceive of a better strategy than to hold back and quietly build up his own strength. Hearing this, Errol agreed it was an option, but a flawed one, as it was uncertain when he would ever be in a position to change things. When I'm properly trained, after I graduate, or maybe when Korda joins the order and grows even stronger. By then, it would be far too late in life to resolve problems that demand immediate action. If he continues to hold back, waiting for the perfect opportunity, his spirit will grow stagnant. Now is his chance to be reborn. He must show them what happens when someone harms their family. Of course, the hero isn't pushing for a full reincarnation into a brawl, because that path usually ends in disaster, but he urged him to remember that he now had the backing of the third prince himself. Ares was genuinely heartened by this. The hero noticed his spirits lift and announced that he was about to share the very plan that would guarantee victory, so he should listen intently. Dueling sounds noble in theory, but in practice, you'd be hard-pressed to find something more barbaric. It is a raw display of consensual violence, and as expected, the entire spectacle attracts a large crowd of spectators and gossips. Errol, in fact, had secured the very best seat. He observed how everyone, down to the old men who had gathered, was completely captivated. Asha then asked him what precisely was going on and why no one had bothered to consult her before arranging a duel. The prince apologized for not informing her, explaining that they were just so eager to teach that boy a lesson. The girl admitted she wanted that too, but this was a terrible method. After all, Ares is not skilled at fencing. The prince replied that she was slightly missing the point. Whether he is skilled or not is not what's most important right now. Asha countered that this was a duel where ability is paramount. The prince acknowledged her point was true, but explained that cunning was the element that truly mattered. He assured her she would understand soon enough if she just waited and watched. He then wondered aloud why she was so fond of Ares. After a moment of reflection, Asha said he was just very sweet. Whenever she hugs him, he makes a face as if he's about to cry. It makes her want to pinch his cheeks just to see his reaction. She was absolutely captivated by him in that moment. Next, she asked the hero if he didn't feel the same. Errol was baffled by her choice of words, wondering what does she mean by captivated. I mean, it's perilous since they're both of the same kind. The reasons to call off this duel just keep piling up. The judge soon announced that, with the third prince's consent, he was officially declaring the duel open. As he launched a magical flare into the sky, the duel began, and Lucen immediately charged forward, screaming for his opponent to die. Kale watched in amazement, wondering how that boy could call himself a nobleman while fighting like a rampaging wild boar. Meanwhile, our hero began communicating with Ares, instructing him to take a half step back and diagonally to the right. The boy did exactly as the prince commanded, effortlessly dodging the blow. Next, Errol instructed, go left, just deflect it, and back up. Now you need to take 2 steps to the right, then 3 diagonally, and keep your sword twisting, hard and sharp. And at the very end of it all, let him lunge. Ares followed every single instruction the prince gave, even managing to knock his opponent down. The other children watching the fight whispered that it looked funny, finding it bizarre how he was leaning away from every single attack. Aisha, who was also watching, was fraught with worry, completely unaware that Errol was secretly feeding instructions directly into her brother's ear. He had established a private communication channel just for them. After all, children move only as they are taught, their steps as obvious as it. For someone who felt reborn with the knowledge of a master strategist, predicting a child's next move was almost laughably simple. You're doing great, he assured the boy. Just keep moving as I prompt. At that moment, Ares' opponent scrambled to his feet, absolutely enraged. He charged, roaring that some brat from a third-rate family would not be the one to humiliate him. The prince immediately told Ares to remain calm, lean lower and attack sharply upwards. The boy, trusting him completely, even closed his eyes as he executed the hero's command. The resulting counterattack was so sudden that even Asha gasped in surprise, as Ares used the technique to strike the most dignified of spots. Naturally, Lucen could not withstand such a painful blow, leaving the judge no choice but to declare that Ares Perel had won. While the boy marveled at his own victory, the hero coolly remarked that it was a one-time trick, just as Kale approached him. I accept the loss, that can't be helped, Kale said, but your jokes, your highness, are far too cruel. The hero, however, feigned ignorance. Whatever could you be talking about, he asked. Kale retorted that, on the whole, he should have guessed the prince would stoop to such subterfuge. But regardless, Kale declared, I'm going to win the next match and put a decisive end to all of this. Ares, in turn, was overjoyed that their plan had succeeded. The hero praised him, saying, you did wonderfully. It all worked out great. Asha also rushed to congratulate him, claiming she believed he would win all along. But Errol knew she was lying. The blushing girl was a terrible fibber. Ares then said, it's my sister's turn now, his voice laced with worry, but I'm worried if everything will be all right. I heard that Lord Kale is the former head of the Order of the 13 Knights. The prince noted that he had indeed heard the same thing, and I can see he's confident in his abilities, Errol added, though it's utterly irrelevant. This reincarnation has taught me that Asha will still win this battle. He told the boy to watch carefully, for there was a distinct reason his sister had become a knight in the first place. Kale informed Miss Perel that he had no intention of holding back, launching into an attack while urging her to fight with all her might. He knew better than to ever underestimate an opponent. Even if he were to lose, he would at least give it his absolute best. Suddenly, his focus shattered for a mere second. He couldn't comprehend what was wrong with his eyes, and in that very moment, his body shot sideways like a flash, sending him crashing into the distant wall. This was, of course, Asha's doing, a clear statement that in her reborn life she would not hold back her full strength. She considered warning him but saw no point. For a man of his station, he was surprisingly fragile. A moment passed, and she then told the prince that if he planned anything of this nature in the future, he must warn her beforehand. Errol observed that thanks to her, his brother was now respected. After today's fight, he would certainly not be bullied anymore. He would personally handle the Lucens to ensure their silence, so she had no need to worry. Before this conflict, she was the one who looked after her brother and solved his problems. It was time for her to relax a bit. Oya was pleased with how the young gentleman was being treated and expressed her sincere gratitude. When faced with good fortune, people often try to deny the reality of the situation, thinking, "Really?" or "This can't be happening." And so, according to the lords of Arnesia had started to recruit and train soldiers for war, but their actions were too cautious to be considered full-scale preparations. They wondered, what if we prepare for a war that never comes? Then all the stockpiled supplies and weapons would just sit in a warehouse, which would be a major hassle. In short, it was all a truly massive headache. Perhaps this was why so many people began to criticize the one lord who had decided to prepare ahead of time. That lord was Aurella, who had proposed they prepare as thoroughly as possible. He spoke with confidence, but no one truly knew if a war would actually happen, so life continued as usual for everyone, and this state of affairs persisted until they heard the news which came from the capital of the Merman Empire. The emperor addressed the honored citizens of his empire, declaring he would make a statement to all peoples of the continent. He asked if they were aware that there was an emerging enemy undermining their nation's finances. This enemy not only reaps undeserved profits by producing all manner of fancy goods, but also brazenly sells the empire's signature product, paper, at will, and that is an act of indescribable audacity. The very villain he spoke of hailed from the Empire of Arnesia. In the name of for the sake of peace on the continent, a peace he cherished after his reincarnation he refused to draw his sword against this villain, a sentiment shared by all of their allies. Claiming to also be victims of this pest, after these words, the ruler of the Demel kingdom, as well as the Grand Duke of the Principality of Span, stepped forward to join him. The Merman Emperor announced that their empire, alongside its allies, the Kingdom of Demel and the Principality of Can, would jointly pass judgment on the Empire of Arnesia. It was a moment that signified the reincarnation of an old war. Their official grievance was then announced. A message was immediately dispatched to the great ruler of the Arnesian Empire, stating that if he wished to prevent the shedding of innocent blood, he must comply with the following demands. First, he must cease all paper manufacturing and shut down production. Second, the secret recipes for their kingdom's unique products must be surrendered. Third, the profits generated from these products must be shared among all their nations. And finally, Prince Aurella was to be sent abroad to study so they could exploit his talents. Aurella was infuriated by this, realizing that they were openly mocking his kingdom. If it is war they desire, then war they shall have, he declared, ordering the troops to assemble. This was the sacred land their ancestors had defended with their lives, and they would not surrender a single inch of it. Before long, a pivotal event unfolded. It took place on the border of the Kingdom of Arnesia's territory, near the formidable Ape Fortress. From that direction, the war banners of the three allied kingdoms crested the horizon. There was no mistaking it. The long-dreaded invasion by the alliance of the three kingdoms had finally begun. Zale demanded a report from his knight, who confirmed the scouts' grim findings. A vanguard of approximately 70,000 warriors was approaching. But that wasn't all. Factoring in the forces massing on the northeastern border, their total number was estimated to be around 100,000 soldiers. The prince knew this massive force was just the beginning. The main army was undoubtedly following close behind. As an heir to the empire, he understood it was his duty to stop them, no matter the cost, rallying his men by declaring that if they stood united, they would have nothing to fear. "We must ensure not even an ant can breach these walls," he roared. The true battle had commenced. Meanwhile, though Prince Aurella had yet to issue the mobilization order, the Phylan forces were already prepared and anxiously awaiting the enemy's appearance. But the prince himself was conspicuously absent from the war council, engaged in a far more peculiar task. He had decided that this was the perfect time to unleash his hidden culinary talents. Daya, his loyal companion, was on tasting duty and had steeled her stomach for the occasion. The first dish the prince prepared was a hearty stew made from tender rabbit meat, which had been generously supplied by the local village headman. It was incredibly delicious, yet once the others learned it was rabbit, their appetites vanished. The enchantress wryly observed that they had clearly grown soft, having forgotten the taste of insects and poisonous fish from their days of near starvation. For the first time in a long while, they were enjoying a proper meal. As Aurella began his next creation, he mused that something more was still needed. Dia watched him, curious about his next move. Judging by the ingredients, wheat flour and dried fruits, she guessed he was making some sort of dessert. The prince just smiled mysteriously, calling it a company secret, which prompted Dia to remark that he was an exceptional cook, especially for a lord who wouldn't typically be caught dead in a kitchen. Errol then proudly stated that he had personally developed the recipes for every single product their trading company offered. He then admitted, "I never told anyone, but I once considered a quiet reincarnation as a chef if things went. It was a path he considered, a way to be reborn away from royal duties." After a moment of reflection, he announced his next dish was ready. He presented a delicacy from Morel, though he kept the exact recipe to himself. After taking a bite, Dia confirmed it was incredibly tasty, but also seemed so rich that eating too much of it would surely pack on the pounds. The prince explained that this was precisely the point, as he developed while designing a high-energy ration for soldiers on the battlefield. He knew that standard military food often becomes inedible if not prepared perfectly. And since he would have to eat it too, a reliable backup plan was essential. Daya, however, brought him back to reality, asking about the mobilization order. She voiced her concern that he still hadn't issued it, but Aurella calmly informed her he was simply finalizing his preparations as thoroughly as possible. He was determined to get everything perfect while they still had time. But on the actual front line, the fighting raged on with brutal intensity. The first fortress to bear the brunt of the assault was now being stormed. From the battlements, Zale declared that it was past time for them to launch a counterattack, but the promised reinforcements were nowhere in sight. He was told only that they were on their way. All the while, the enemy swarmed the walls, relentlessly climbing higher and higher, making any offensive move incredibly difficult. Just then, a messenger arrived with an urgent intelligence report. A wary Prince Zale demanded to know what had happened, and the knight's response left him utterly speechless. That the approaching enemy army numbered a staggering 210,000, charging relentlessly forward on horseback. The thundering stampede of hooves grew louder with each passing second. Zale's face tightened at the news. He knew they were already upon them. At that very moment, an emergency council was underway within the Grand Chamber of the Aresia Empire. Reports confirmed the enemy's forces were still swelling, making it only a matter of time before their defenses were smashed to smithereens. "We cannot continue like this. It would be wiser to retreat and reform our front line," one of the subordinates desperately advised. He stressed that His Majesty's safety was paramount, but it was clear the Emperor was deeply conflicted by the suggestion. He ultimately agreed that a firm front line was crucial and that they had to convey the sheer gravity of the current crisis to the people. Every soul in that room understood the direness of their situation. Thera then issued a decree. Let even the feudal lords and aristocrats with any fighting capability be sent into battle. He was ordering them to mobilize every last force they could muster. Errol was astonished, realizing his older brother was determined to join the war, likely for the pursuit of personal glory. Typically, members of the imperial family were kept far from the front lines, yet even he had received a summons. Facing odds of 3-1 is a daunting task, and a numerical advantage is a brutal reality of war. The Empire had to prosper, otherwise, this second chance at life, this whole reincarnation, would be for nothing. He accepted his fate. He would serve as a private, temporarily leaving the estate in the hands of a few trusted soldiers. With the estate secured, our hero began his preparations for the battlefield. He stood at the precipice of war and declared it was about time he stepped onto the grand stage. Naturally, Kanna was right by his side, but he urged her to remain safely in Philia. The girl's reaction, however, was crystal clear. She flatly refused, insisting that if he was going, she would go too. In his mind, anyone could go. The boy knew just how stubborn she could be. Her swordsmanship would undoubtedly be an asset, but what man in his right mind would willingly send someone they cherished to the front lines? He briefly considered asking their father to intervene for the estate's protection, but suddenly, his sister stepped closer, her voice firm. "I'm grateful that you're worried about me, but at the same time, I will not let you go to war alone. If my younger brother goes, then his older sister is going with him." Errol realized there was no changing her mind. A faint smile touched his lips as he conceded, "If you truly feel that way, I won't hold you back any longer." He then told her it was time he gave her something. The girl's interest was piqued as our hero presented a magnificent weapon. He explained that Mistress Philia had entrusted it to his care. This is a sword passed down through generations of the Kest family. It was named Celtia by the first head of our house. Even the dwarves acknowledged its superior quality, noting that forging such a treasure was a feat of incredible difficulty. As Kanna examined the blade, she asked, "Oh brother, can I truly accept?" He affirmed, reminding her that she was the third-ranked swordmaster in the entire kingdom. His sister's face lit up with joy, and she was immensely grateful to their mother. With that settled, our hero knew he couldn't show any hesitation. It is in moments like these that a leader must be resolute. Now, his true mission began. To minimize casualties as much as possible. It was a purpose he felt he was reborn to fulfill. For a true warrior, there is no greater reward than protecting the lives of his comrades. Therefore, he must not show a single trace of fear. Standing tall before his people, the young lord announced with a booming voice, "By order of His Majesty, our forces are moving to the front." The enemy force numbered a staggering 320,000, but Errol had not trained his men just to become statistics of war. He refused to build victory on their sacrifices. They had a duty to ride out and defend their honor. The army from his estate numbered 23,000 strong, and he was determined that all 23,000 would return home when this war was over. In short order, Errol and his forces reached the northeastern front lines at the fortress of Daria. The sight that greeted them was one of grim destruction and weary, hollow-eyed soldiers. The battle had been far more vicious than Errol had anticipated. Arriving at the command post of his brother, the hero greeted the crown prince, Zale, who greeted him in turn. Zale was the first to speak, apologizing for having to involve them in this disaster. He insisted that if he had been in command, the situation never would have devolved this far. The hero was surprised to hear such words, especially given the overwhelming number of enemies they faced. Compared to the Empress, his elder brother was undoubtedly a decent man. In response, Errol simply stated he'd heard the current situation was dire. Zale confirmed it was far worse, explaining that their fortress was completely surrounded by the enemy. The entire 320,000-strong army would be upon them soon. The enemy was regrouping for the moment, but the battle would rage anew on the morrow. Errol grasped the severity of the crisis. If he had been delayed by even a couple of days, this territory would have been completely overrun. His brother continued, "So, you brought 23,000 soldiers? That's a great help. With them, we can hold out until the rest of the lords arrive." Errol thought to himself, *, hold out? Does he plan to use the men I've poured so much of my soul into training? Asterisk asterisk. As nothing more than a human shield? Asterisk. No, that was an outcome he would never accept for them. That is why he told Zale there was no reason to wait. It was time to abandon their defensive strategy and completely change the face of this battle. We cannot afford to stall for another second, he declared. The Crown Prince replied that he understood the sentiment, but given their position, such a move was impossible. Errol then revealed with a sly grin that he had prepared something for just such an occasion. Let me show you, he said. The moment he had received word of the war, he commissioned his blacksmiths to improve upon a certain design, and now his older brother saw the result. Zale's surprise was palpable, for before him stood what could only be described as a mobile siege tower. It will accommodate our marksmen and our mages, Errol explained. It's a prefabricated tower, which makes it exceptionally mobile. Zale, looking over, exclaimed that this would be an immense help, but the hero held up a hand, indicating there was more. As the next creation was unveiled, his brother was left speechless, asking what in the world it was called. Errol considered for a moment. If it must have a name, let's call it the Blade Wheel. He explained that similar weapons were often used in ancient times for breaking sieges. It would bolster their defense and inflict tremendous psychological pressure on the enemy. He had perfected the design with the aid of both magicians and dwarves. He pointed out that they had plenty of blades on hand. They only needed to assemble the base, and the weapon would be ready for action. I will take command of the defense, Errol stated, and let you, brother, focus entirely on the counterattack. Zale loved the sound of that, feeling a surge of hope for the first time. Errol, however, was thinking that those three scoundrels had finally crossed the line. Asterisk. Now is the perfect time to launch our counterattack. My reincarnation has prepared me for this very moment. Asterisk. Soon after, word reached the enemy camp that Eresia had reinforcements. The three enemy commanders conferred, agreeing that the resistance was becoming unexpectedly serious, judging by how effortlessly their last assault was repelled. The first wave had faltered. It seemed their assumption about the Crown Prince's incompetence was spot on, which only complicated things. Abruptly, the commander demanded to know why one of his subordinates was smirking. The soldier replied, confessing his fascination with the very milkman who had just brought in reinforcements. He was of course referring to the third prince of Aurella Arnesia, the young genius who was the very reason for the Empire's sudden rise in wealth and the catalyst for this entire war. The others were stunned to learn that this legendary boy was actually present on the battlefield. The commander mused that initially, the rumors of some young upstart creating such impressive goods seemed like utter nonsense, the kind of miracle you'd expect from someone who was reborn with divine knowledge. But now, he smirked, they had the perfect opportunity to verify those claims firsthand. In that case, he wondered what his allies would have to say, because they were undoubtedly just as curious. His subordinate agreed but pointed out that the prince's high status presented a somewhat awkward complication. The commander acknowledged this but reassured his man not to worry, promising he wouldn't jeopardize their agreement. All that mattered was that their forces were armed to the teeth and ready to annihilate the enemy. Across the field, Arl's army stood poised, a force of approximately 23,000 soldiers arrayed and watching their every move. Our heroes swelled with pride, scarcely believing this formidable force was his to command. In contrast, the attacking army of the three-state union numbered around 50,000 as they began their thunderous charge. As the enemy advanced, our hero calmly ordered his troops to execute the plan exactly as they had rehearsed. Meanwhile, the enemy commanders sneered. Cowards were just hiding behind shields, ordering their men to crush them with overwhelming force. With nearly double their numbers, he boasted that even the most brilliant strategy couldn't win such a battle. The moment those words left his lips, he spotted something strange in the sky. A dark cloud was rapidly approaching their position, which turned out to be a massive volley of arrows that rained down upon his men. Those quick enough to raise a shield or with proper defensive gear managed to survive the onslaught, but countless others fell instantly. A frantic order was shouted among the knights. They were commanded to raise their shields, cast aside their fear, and press the attack. Errol observed that his initial volley hadn't been enough to stop them. The attackers weren't breaking, a single arrow storm wouldn't suffice. The assault on the defensive line grew fiercer and more intense. Yet, despite their ferocious onslaught, they could not break through the shield wall. One of the enemy knights, pushing forward, realized his advance had completely stalled. He couldn't move forward an inch. The shields they were facing were clearly different from ordinary ones. He wondered what strange material they were crafted from. Then, in a coordinated move, Arl's soldiers thrust bladed weapons out from their shield formation, clearing the way and catching the attackers completely by surprise. The shocked enemies made the swift decision to fall back, but for most of them, it was far too late to escape the deadly trap. Our prince took no pleasure in the slaughter, viewing it as a necessary evil and placing the blame squarely on their opponent's brainless commander. Speaking of whom, the enemy commander received a report that his infantry was crumbling and was forced to call for magical support to join the fray. He was visibly annoyed, having to resort to the help of his mages so early in the battle, a move that clearly wounded his pride. But with his infantry failing, he had no other options. Mages were a terrifying force, far more so than regular soldiers, capable of felling even aura-clad knights. Their high-tier spells were nothing short of weapons of mass destruction. Understanding the immense value of magic and its mana limitations, the commander had wanted to hold them in reserve, but now he sent them into battle, ordering them to strike with their full. He intended to prove that their cheap tricks were useless in the face of true power. The mages began to chant, gathering their energy, but then, suddenly, something went terribly wrong. Enraged, the commander screamed, demanding to know why they were just standing there and ordering them to attack immediately. Whereas mages committing treason, the commander was suddenly informed that their spells were failing, blocked by an unseen force. A horrifying realization dawned on him. This could only mean one thing: the enemy had powerful mages of their own. Meanwhile, Dia was in command of their overwhelming magical force, reporting that the task was almost laughably simple. She found it so easy she questioned if the enemy mages were even present, as she was a 6th-grade wizard facing opponents who were merely 4th grade. The enemy commander desperately screamed at his mages, demanding to know how long they could hold out, but their answer was a grim one. However, the enemy also found themselves unable to use battle magic, as their defensive spells were failing. The blocking magic they employed required an immense amount of mana, yet Dia seemed unconcerned as she prepared to advance to the next stage. In the next moment, the enemy warriors were barraged by that same offensive magic, prompting their commander to erupt in fury. He berated his subordinate, roaring that it was impossible they couldn't use magic. The wizard, utterly bewildered, insisted it couldn't be done. No matter how vast a person's mana reserves were, unleashing such a powerful spell immediately after casting a block was considered impossible. It was simply unbelievable that their foes could accomplish such a feat. Then, their eyes fell upon the magic stone, the most powerful of its kind. The enemy commander was left speechless, wondering how a mere feudal lord could have acquired such an invaluable treasure. He could only wonder what kind of monster their leader truly was, as the spells from Arnesia's defenders rained down relentlessly, this time with ice magic. Knights were frozen solid where they stood, followed by devastating fire and other deadly incantations that swept the battlefield. On that fateful day, the invading army lost a staggering 30,000 soldiers, yet having been reborn, Errol was again convinced that victory in war brought no joy. He couldn't comprehend the purpose of all this senseless slaughter. His only wish was to be resting, not orchestrating this carnage. Soon after, SAA approached to ask what their next move would be regarding the retreating enemy, but the hero decided against pursuit, stating his troops needed a breather. As for the soldiers left behind, he ordered them to be taken as prisoners of war, while Zale celebrated his brother's monumental victory. The successful repulse was a massive blow, a defeat so thorough that even the enemy couldn't have anticipated it. "Well done, brother," Zale praised. Errol, however, humbly replied that he was merely lucky, claiming his elder brother had dealt with the truly formidable enemies. The hero felt his brother was misunderstanding something fundamental. His goal since his reincarnation was to rest, not to become a frontline hero. Therefore, all the honor and glory from this victory would be reserved for Zale, whose counterattack must have crushed the enemy's morale. Errol suggested that now might be the perfect opportunity to retaliate, an idea the knights and Aurella readily supported, telling him to proceed as he saw fit. The crown prince declared that in that case, it was now Eresia's turn to go on the offensive, a development Errol found rather convenient. As long as Zale was causing a commotion in the enemy camp, he could finally get some much-needed rest for a while. He knew that rest during wartime was possible, provided one was positioned safely in the rear. The Imperial Army, led by Zale, launched an immediate counter. The Phelan soldiers' activity allowed the defense forces to be split into 3 parts, countering the enemy's numerical advantage. They opted for a battle of attrition over an all-out war, employing minimal defense and maximizing tactical offensive maneuvers. In the meantime, while fierce battles raged on the front lines, all was quiet in the rear where Ale was enjoying his well-deserved vacation. He savored a full meal, a luxury shared by his subordinate knights, but while everyone else was relaxing, AA was observing everything. Was growing worried for some reason. She soon confessed that she felt deeply uncomfortable with the fact that so much blood was being spilled while they were just sitting by relaxing. Sia, however, simply asked what the big deal was, remarking that in war, as the saying goes, it is inevitable. It was the very definition of survival of the fittest, a perfectly executed strategy. This advantage left Filia's troops with the flimsy excuse of being slow, knowing that engaging them now would be a lost cause. Yesterday's devastating counterattack had thoroughly rattled them. They wouldn't dare poke that hornet's nest a second time. In essence, this meant they could rest easy today with a clear conscience, though as Errol considered this, another thought surfaced. He wondered if it was right for Dia to rest like this. Perhaps they should find her a more comfortable spot. She held off half the block on her own yesterday and undoubtedly expended the most energy, as absorbing and circulating the magic stone's mana requires an extreme amount of stamina. That's precisely why he'd insisted she rest, but she argued she needed to eat first and that sleep would have to wait. And so, she immediately began to devour the meat, eating until she was completely full, after which she simply passed out, asleep right there at the table. Errol then assured the others that it was fine, they would finish their meal and then they could all get some rest. After all, great things were already in store for them tomorrow. The enemy commander received the report and immediately recognized the direness of their situation. The crown prince leading the opposing army was, of course, an annoyance, but he was still wet behind the ears. The real problem was definitely not him. The recent counterattack was far too precise. But wasn't that upstart just some kind of merchant? The man couldn't believe that his army of 23,000 men had been crushed, losing 30,000 of their warriors out of a 50,000-strong force. Combat is all about experience. To truly grasp its nature, it is much more important to feel the heat of battle yourself than to merely draw up plans in your head. It was baffling how a 16-year-old boy could orchestrate such a feat. It's almost as if he was reborn with a lifetime of tactical knowledge. However, the biggest puzzle was why his superior was sitting in the rear. With his ability, he could alter the course of the entire war in an instant. It was a complete mystery what he was plotting, or who this Aurella Eresia truly was. The next, Aurella's forces merged with his brother Zill's troops, and together they marched to reclaim the fortress. Our hero was inside a car, meticulously reviewing his strategy. He ordered the driver to reduce their pace by half, stating, "We need to move a bit slower." Can, sitting beside him, looked surprised and asked what the matter was. Aurel simply reported that he believed they were already being expected. Last time, the Alliance took heavy losses from a direct assault, Can acknowledged. Exactly. Aurel continued. They aren't fools. They won't make the same mistake twice. What's more, the terrain we're about to enter is the perfect ground for an ambush. I am certain that the Alliance will not pass up such a golden opportunity. And if the enemy is preparing an attack, let them prepare for the consequences. As Aurel's soldiers entered the treacherous pass, an ambush was indeed lying in wait, and the men concealed within it saw their targets approaching. The signal was given for everyone to get ready, confident that victory would be theirs this time. However, as time ticked by, their leader noticed the enemy was delayed. He had been told, of course, that they were moving rather slowly due to transporting a watchtower, but this was far too slow. Suddenly, a dreadful thought struck. Just as the thundering hooves announced their arrival, I knew the time had come and ordered my subordinates to launch the attack. Volleys of arrows rained down upon the caravan from every direction, but they were unexpectedly blocked by a magical barrier, failing to serve their purpose. It was undoubtedly the work of shield magic. Enemy mages reported their spells were useless against a similar blockade, leaving the commander to wonder how it was even possible. He couldn't fathom how they could cast magic so swiftly. Had they truly anticipated this? Weighing the situation, he reported that continuing the assault was pointless and a retreat was imperative. Hearing their commander's orders, the soldiers began to withdraw, only to immediately fall into hidden traps. A massive number of snares had been scattered over a wide area, and Senna was suddenly right beside them. The girl commented that a skilled hunter always knows where to set their traps, and that such traps are known to catch people just as easily as they catch animals. After delivering those chilling words, she immediately went on. The offensive. The enemies, not expecting an ambush of their own, were unable to fight back effectively. The girl stated that if one prepares for an attack, they must also be prepared for the consequences, adding that she was simply relaying her leader's words. The enemy commander furiously grabbed his weapon, shouting that she had no right to stand in their way, declaring that he was certainly not going to lose to some mere wench. With that, he charged forward, relying solely on his own strength. Sina didn't deign to reply. As if reborn with newfound power, she simply channeled her aura into one of her limbs. After that, the battle only intensified. Ania was also in the vicinity. She scoffed at their empty threats, noting it was all talk. Much earlier, Aurel had instructed them to present themselves as the most despicable kind of opponent, so the enemy would avoid them not out of fear, but out of pure disgust.